Não há mais gente, somos só 2 para 3, por isso não para partilhar nas redes todas.
As pessoas ao fundo estão a ouvir a gente pronto, fazer assim um teste de som, 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3, olá, 1, 2, 3.
dar só lá a traduzir a sessão. Ok, alguém aqui precisa que haja tradução, que alguém aqui não consegue perceber a sessão em inglês? Ok, não, perfect. So we will now begin our session in English. I'm Anna, I'm from AmbientalIST, and I'm joined by Teresa from Scientest Rebellion. We chose this topic because we understood that this campaign is very important. Debt for Climate is a campaign led by the Global South and worker groups, and it calls for the cancellation of the debt by Global South to financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund. But why? These loans do not allow these countries to truly make progress and force them to resort to already established natural resource extracting economies. But as a matter of fact, the main emitters, which are the countries from the global north, are those in control of these international funds. But in the end, we are the ones that have a duty to help vulnerable populations face the climate crisis. To understand all the layers of this conflict, we invited, in the end, 4 activists, and I will start by presenting Luis and Esteban. I don't know if you can turn on your cameras, but yes, these are representatives of the campaign Debt for Climate. Then we have Sheila Rodrigues, which is an intersectional activist. She works with Minas Now, Rede 8, and Extinction Rebellion. And finally, we have Eugenia Pires, which is an economist with a focus on public debt and financing, and works in Colabor. So, I will now ask for you to do your intervention, starting by Debt for Climate, and to begin with a short introduction of your work and experience. So maybe Esteban or Luis, I don't know which one wants to present the Debt for Climate campaign.
Sure, I think we're going to split it up and Sergio go first. 5 minutes, no? So thank you for organizing. Anna, thank you for inviting us. Thank you for dealing with all the technical complications. I'm Esteban from Argentina. I'm currently based in Germany. I had to leave Argentina because of intense persecution and death threats from the anti-fracking struggle in Vaca Muerta 3 years ago. And I'm involved with Debt for Climate. It's a campaign, a movement that we have been building for about 1 year, a little less than a year. It's a very young movement that is coming from the Global South and is coming as a response to a lot of these individual struggles that we are fighting, in my case coming from the anti-fracking struggle, others from anti-mining, deforestation, and a lot of campaigns that we have been running against offshore drilling and things like this, that we always find that we do global mobilizations. It's really inspiring, really empowering, but we don't have enough power to actually make a difference to stop this extraction. And in the desperation that the climate crisis and the extractive industries are getting out of hand, are getting out of control, and we're always catching up, we try to find and think out of the box to find common denominators that could speak to a broader audience of people, that is not only the climate activists and the environmental frontline defenders, but also to the working class, to other movements that could help us break out of the climate activism bubble that we desperately need to break out of globally, and especially those of us in the Global South or from the Global South whose lives are at stake and are the front lines of this destruction. So when we are fighting fracking or mining or techniques like this, it's usually difficult to engage the workers and the workers' unions, because usually the governments and the corporations do a great job of marketing it as a progress, as an economic development, as something that will bring jobs to areas that are already very impoverished by these very industries sometimes and these very corrupt governments. So it's difficult to involve the workers in an anti-fracking struggle directly or an anti-mining struggle. But when you talk to the workers about debt, you know we don't need to explain that debt is the modern form of colonialism. They used to invade us with armies. Europe conquered, most of the world has been colonized by European countries at one point or another of history, including Portugal, of course. And now they don't need to do that anymore because they perfected neocolonialism, using debt as a prime form to enslave a country, to be forced to pay this huge interest, impose austerity measures on its populations, and keep extracting more and more fossil fuels in order to be able to pay this debt, this unpayable debt. So it's a vicious cycle that simply is a way to keep the Global South plundering the Global South, and the Global South shipping resources to the cycles of consumption and waste of the Global North. So we found that when we target this common denominator of debt, it really speaks very loud and very clear to a lot of groups that normally would not come directly to join environmental fights, like the workers' unions. We've been mobilizing several global actions since the last few months. The first one was at the end of June during the G7 summit in Germany. We mobilized in 24 countries. And in that mobilization already, some of the biggest labor unions in Argentina and thousands of workers around the world mobilized in this Debt for Climate campaign that is basically demanding cancel the debt of the Global South as a first step for the Global North to begin to acknowledge and pay back their climate debt, which is at least one order of magnitude higher than our financial debts from the Global South to the Global North, which are in the trillions of dollars, which are already illegitimate. They have been paid many times over. And if we were to be allowed to cancel these trillions of dollars of debt, we could leave trillions of dollars of fossil fuels in the ground that we have plenty of and we are continuing to extract to pay that debt, including many climate bombs, carbon bombs like Vaca Muerta, that will consume a major part of the global carbon budget, and is continuous, one of hundreds of carbon bombs in the Global South that continue to get extracted, opposite to the Paris Agreement, contrary to all the climate goals, and there's just no chance that any Global South country could remotely afford or dream of taking any climate action when we have to pay 90 cents of every dollar we make to the IMF, the World Bank, the Global North, Nigeria, to put one example. Their cost of interest of the debt, their cost of servicing their debt a few months ago surpassed their national revenue. So who could expect Nigeria to pay to take any climate action? They're doing the exact opposite. They're drilling as much as they can, and so will the rest of the Global South. And to close, the Global North, there's a lot of great climate movements, often accused of being too white, too privileged, and we know that this is the case in many cases, but everyone is talking about becoming decolonized, doing this work of decolonizing themselves. But by creating that for climate, what we found is that it's a great tool to take concrete action that is really empowering, because the centers of power where the decisions are made on this debt are in Europe, are in the Global North, Washington, D.C., Paris, Berlin, London, and so on. So we want to invite all of you to join us. We know that Portugal is a very special case, because you not only have been one of the greatest empires in history, but also you are one of the countries most affected from the south of Europe, of the periphery of Europe, affected by that and by the policies of the IMF. So we can find ways to work together to speak to the working class, not only to the workers, but also indigenous movements, feminist movements that I'm sure Luis can touch upon, and many other groups that this narrative is so powerful and so rich that we think we have tapped on something really, really. Debt cancellation, the idea of debt is not new, it's really old, all of the Bible, but connecting it to the climate crisis and bringing together all this group is really new and very powerful, and I think we can do a lot together, we can be unstoppable. So thank you, and Luis can say it much better than me.
No, I'm sure I can't, but I will just take it where you got your applause. Yeah, so basically, I will not speak so much about the intersectionality and the feminist perspective of it all. If some of you might be maybe interested about it, we had a webinar together with Silvia Federici on this topic, and you can just look it up, and we can send maybe the link for the webinar on this, and then we can just listen to what we talked there on that regard. I just want to touch on another topic, or also come to the more concrete hand of things, because when we talk about this, about debt cancellation and debt cancellation for the Global South, it all sounds so enormously big and so enormously impossible. Like, how could this ever be achieved? But let me calculate, in 16 days, we have an amazing opportunity, to show that debt cancellation is not only necessary, but also really possible. Because on that day, on February 27th, maybe some of you know this already, it will be the 70th anniversary of the cancellation of the debt of Germany after World War II. So they accumulated debt from previous to World War II, so that were still outstanding reparation payments from World War I, including debt to banks and private banks and corporations. Then the debt of the war itself, that the Nazi regime itself accumulated, and the debt of post-World War, amongst others, the Marshall Plan. All of that taken together, with the lowest calculation possible, they received a 50% debt relief. So, and if the total number of the debt or of the amount of debt that Germany had would have been calculated with the appropriate interest calculation, this amount would be a lot higher. So basically, Germany, I think it's a triple debt cancellation that Germany, the country that was responsible for World War II, received. And not only did it receive debt cancellation, but it also negotiated conditions that were extremely favorable to the country, and that made the so-called economic miracle, which is not a miracle, it's just debt cancellation, that none of the countries of the global south are accorded to today, like paying back the remaining debt in its own currency, for example. And the cherry on the cake, as we say in German, was that the person who negotiated this for Germany was no other than Josef Hermann, and he was called the most influential banker of the Third Reich. He was part of the financing committee that organized Germany's debt cancellation. So they made pretty good business with the Nazis after World War II, basically. Which is not a surprise, but still it's shocking. Like 1953, it's crazy. So all these arguments that we receive, like, debt cancellation is not possible, or we can't do it because the countries of the global south, it's their own fault, they mismanaged, or they are so corrupt. Like, yo, guys, you did this for Germany after the war. There's just no argument for not doing this today to enable a just transition and to mitigate the climate crisis. There's just no excuse. So on this day, we're coming together globally, and obviously also in Berlin, in Germany, and invite MAPA speakers that come from some of the countries that signed or later accept the London Agreement, that are today highly indebted, and which Germany is just boycotting any debt restructuring, debt cancellation whatsoever, like Argentina, like Pakistan, like Chile, like the DRC, and so on. Even Sri Lanka was one of the signatory countries that, back in the days, called Ceylon. And these countries are today in a debt crisis, and the most affected countries by the climate crisis. And they enable Germany debt cancellation, and Germany is not doing its part at all. So if you're interested in some of your groups, maybe organizing something for the 27th, feel free to reach out. We will definitely be on the streets around the world and continue afterwards as well. So I'm very happy to be in touch, and thank you for organizing this. And that would be it from my side. Thank you.
Our own questions, but in the end we would like to hear from the public. The first one is that I know there was some climate finance approved in the 26th COP, which was for the aim of investing in transitioning from the global south. But I wanted to know your opinion in these finances and if they're significant or not.
Well, as far as I know, it goes even like. Are you addressing it to us? Sorry, it's a bit difficult because we can't see you, so we don't know in which direction you're. Okay. So as far as I know, at least, this goes back even further to the Paris Agreement. No, where they agreed to pay $100 billion per year for climate investment, which still hasn't happened to these days. And of course, it's not debt cancellation is one aspect of a big package that is needed to mitigate the climate crisis, where reparations, loss and damage, and climate finance are additional packages, but that have to be not only accompanied, but preluded by debt cancellation. But I think Esteban usually explains this situation much better. So maybe I give the word to you.
Yes, it's bullshit. That's how much better I explain it. They are full of shit. It's greenwashing tactics to make us believe that there is some action being taken It's a great step, however, that the recognition of loss and damage that happened after COP is being a great step towards the global north, acknowledging that they hold a debt toward the global south. So in that sense, it's really important that we capitalize on that, that we use that as a leverage to deepen that understanding and hold them accountable for the entire climate debt. But as we were talking with some comrades from Uganda when we met with them who were also involved in the loss and damage campaign, and we were talking about, brainstorming and exchanging, and then one of them said, yeah, no, I get it, like, if they pay some loss and damage to our countries, but they don't cancel our debt first, it's very likely that the few millions that are also really small amounts of money compared to the scale of the problem, the millions that will give us for loss and damage, by the way, sometimes in the form of more debt, with interest, which is even more criminal, but the money that they will give us loss and damage will be used likely to pay the debt, to pay the interest on the debt. So it's like putting water in a bucket full of holes. First, you need to fill the holes so that the water can be contained by the bucket. So loss and damage and without debt cancellation, it's just going to be used to pay this debt because it's really strangling our countries. We really need to demand the entirety of the debt cancellation, and they also need to pay loss and damage and do climate finance and reparations, but not in the form of more loans. And this comes as the wolf disguised as sheep in the form of more debt to keep our countries even more under the burden of debt.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, that makes it much more clear because usually people use that argument that there's already green financing, but clearly it's not enough. We also heard there's another strategy which is debt swaps, which is just swapping a bit of the debt for climate investment, but not the whole thing. So what is your opinion on debt for climate swaps? Maybe, I don't know if
you want to slide or should I start? With the danger of repeating Esteban's very profound analysis of it being bullshit, I think it can apply to the swap story as well. The problem with it is that it's so well marketed that it's very difficult to see through it. It's even more difficult to see through it than to the climate finance stuff. Because the way that the debt swaps are functioning is that usually a really insignificant part of the debt of a country are not being cancelled, but they are being bought up by a third entity, usually an NGO from the global north, such as the WWF, is really jumping onto nature swaps, debt for nature swaps, debt for climate swaps. And basically they are buying up this share of the debt in return to control the environment or a certain area of the environment in the country that is indebted. So it's not debt cancellation, it's basically putting NGOs and other global north institutions as or pseudo governments of the environment and the people that are living with and in these environments, right? Because there is an anti-landscape usually. And basically so they are buying up these shares of the debt in return for control over the environment and the people who live with it. Now the latest example, and we heard a lot about this, now it's Portugal with Caber. The thing is that and also there, like, it sounded amazing, but the problem is that it's not that cancellation. It's that Portugal is making Caber pay for a green transition by making Caber invest the debt into a green fund where we don't know who's gonna define what is going to be this green fund, and so it's just complete green colonialism, green neocolonialism. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything or if we're out of time.
Yeah, if you allow me, just 2 minutes, is that okay? I just think it's important to explain why this is so important that debt cancellation must be sovereign and self-determined. The just transition needs to be self-determined. When they give you this financing for green action, it's usually earmarked with a lot of things that are to benefit the corporations from the global north countries. When they do these swaps, it's all, of course, coming from the same institutions that are the core of the problem, the core of the climate crisis, and the icons of financial colonialism, like the IMF and the World Bank. So how can any solutions come from the people that have wrecked the planet and wrecked people around the world? So we, as social movements, as climate movements of the world, our job is to push for the right thing. Our job is to build power for the right demands. And of course, when governments will always compromise, when we build enough power to make any of these changes, proportionally, these demands, these debt swaps and stuff like that will also grow, because they will come to try to do something that is not the right thing, but it looks good. So we need to be very aware going forward what we need to demand, so that we can build power for the right causes. And when governments compromise, at least we will have more power to push them in the right direction, to do a self-determined and sovereign just transition, not something dictated by the IMF, the World Bank, or the corporations.
Okay, thank you so much. That makes it much more clear. I will have to send you a new link for the meeting, but as we're doing this, I would like to audience to think about some questions you might have and respond to the speakers, because our international speakers have less time than Shella and Kojeni. So yeah, if you have any questions about the movement, they want to extend it to Portugal, if you want to be a part of it, just let us know. Yeah, okay.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah. Sorry.
To enter this new link.
No, so everybody's very shy today. I know it's been a very long day.
Okay, so my question would be, why are the countries not just saying, why are the countries not just refusing to pay the debt? I mean, they're sovereign countries. In principle, they could say, we just don't pay. I guess there are some repercussions that are intrinsic to the system, but I want to understand what these are.
Think about the answer in the meantime. The question here was, why don't countries simply refuse to pay the debt?
I would like to ask if the movement has proposals to change the way the banking system works. Because that is connected with the way the money is created. We have proposals to change the way the system works.
So if you could enter the room I just sent, please. We're all here. So you can start answering. So this question was, why don't countries just refuse paying the debt, right?
You did not hear me?
I'm hearing now.
Can you hear me okay? I can do it in that so make it easier, okay? Can you hear me now, Anna?
Yes, you can answer now. Yeah.
So I was saying thank you for that question. It's a really important question, and that's exactly what our job is. The reason that countries of the Global South are not using the power of defaulting is because not our leaders want to. Did we lose her now?
No, we're here. You can.
Okay.
You can talk.
None of our leaders want to end up like Thomas Sankara, who is one of our major inspirations from the Global South. He was a revolutionary anti-colonial leader from Burkina Faso, who was assassinated 35 years ago last October for actually calling on the Global South to unite and default on the loans and create a united front against debt, which is the only thing where the debt can become a source of power. If the Global South could unite and default together, like any borrowers, any situation where people owe money, if everyone comes together and refuses to pay, then the lender is in trouble. So that's what he tried to do, and he was assassinated for that. So today, no leader of the Global South, even progressive ones, they don't want to end up as Thomas Sankara, and they know that the IMF and World Bank, the power of these institutions and what's behind them is way beyond the level of power that they could confront. Also, none of our leaders are true leaders. Most of them are bureaucrats, they are corrupt, they are co-opted by these very institutions, they are financed and put there by them. So even so-called progressive governments like Argentina, as my country, they not only did not confront the IMF fraudulent loan to right-wing President Macri to help him win the re-election a few years ago, but actually legitimized it. It was totally illegitimate, and they put it through Congress to approve it, to be able to borrow even more money to pay the interest on the old debt. So all of them, in one way or another, for fear or for corruption, are in bed with them. That's where we need a social and climate movement globally that can come together and actually build power, not just proclaim the right things and the right truth that everyone can do, and it's still important to hear the academic truth and so on. We need power, we need to build power, and it will only happen when we have millions of people, the workers as the spinal cord, striking across the Global South, and that's our vision actually, to force our countries of the Global South to create a front against debt, like Sankara was calling for, to withhold payments, so that we force the Global North and the IMF and World Bank to the table to force this cancellation. It will not be done because it's the right thing to do. It will only be done when we force them to do it. And I'm going to stop here because the time is running out. I'm going to jump in the other way. Thank you.
Amazing. Yes. Thank you so much, Esteban. I think it answered the question. And it also reminds us of our role as kind of privileged activists, because we live in countries where we can do these types of actions. We can do these kinds of movements without getting repercussions and risking our lives. So this is a good reminder of that. So do we have more questions from the audience? Yes, okay. Okay. We'll send you a new link. Okay, so mas se quiserem falar um bocadinho sobre este tópico, basicamente Death for Climate contactou a Scientest.
Tivemos em competição durante uma campanha que houve na Alemanha em outubro, em que tivemos juntamente com o Death for Climate e a Organização que podíamos falar no plenário hoje, ao final da manhã, em que uma das nossas reivindicações era para que a Alemanha, enquanto um dos países mais poderosos e com mais dinheiro no FMI, para que pedisse, ou melhor dizendo, exigisse o cancelamento da dívida, como eles aliás já tinham prometido fazer, mas acabaram por não fazê-lo na prática. Aliás, a Luís, que temos ouvido falar, esteve a falar diretamente com o ministro, o atual ministro dos Negócios Estrangeiros alemão, que lhe disse, para mais ver, que quando houvesse a reunião seguinte do FMI, iam dizer que a Alemanha queria cancelar a dívida global. Não aconteceu, a resposta foi uma ação direta que realizámos no Ministério das Finanças na Alemanha, juntamente com a Luís e o Esteban. Agora o acompanhar a abolição, essa semana tem que sair mais cedo e lá está. Depois os problemas técnicos todos é melhor sempre mandar a primeira.
The connection was a bit bad, so you broke up. Could you repeat it, please?
Yes, so it's whether Done for Climate is looking into ways of dealing with the banking sector itself and how it's done in the economy, I guess, and looking, for example, into the way that money is produced and all of the things that trickle down from that.
Well, yes, of course. I mean, that is a form of money production. So we are going back to the roots of that, and obviously by inviting people to look into how the finance sector and the finance system is working with the actors and the institutions involved. We are inviting them basically to look deeper into how the finance sector, the banking system, money production is continuing and upholding a system of global inequality. Of course, the thing is that we have in the movement and the more leftist-oriented movements, we always have this, how do you say, not willingness, I'm lacking an English word here, like the standard of complete system change, overthrowing it all at once, but which results often in an apathy because you don't know where to start. And that for climate, basically, you have to start somewhere, and that for climate is an option and an opportunity to start somewhere to really open a crack in the system. Because without this amount of debt and without this debt system, the finance sector would simply just collapse and not work. So if you take away this political leverage that global north institutions have through that over global south countries, you change quite a lot of about how the finance sector system, the banking system, and so on and so forth work. But yes, if you start to question about the origins of that you will end up questioning the origin of money, because as I said, like debt is at some point also at the origin of money. Esteban, the question was whether Debt for Climate is looking into whether Debt for Climate is looking into the origins of money production, how money is produced in the banking system itself, and offering solutions in how to change the banking system, basically. Don't know if you want to add anything to that, but that you're in the loop.
Do we have any further questions?
So, I think we kind of talked about how the movement works internationally. We can see how it could be very positive to do it in Portugal as well. And I think maybe Sheila can explain better what is the situation of neocolonialism, either Portugal with other previous colonies, but also how Portugal is being exploited nowadays by the global north. So if Esteban and Luis don't have anything to add, we thank you so much for your presentation and for being here. It was very nice to hear from your experience, and we hope to talk soon. Yeah, there you go.
Can I add one last thing very quickly?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you for inviting us. Great to be with you. Sorry that we couldn't be there in person, but hopefully next time we can join you. To the last question that I think was really important, I listened to Luis's answer, most of it. And basically, you have to think of this as, you know, we talked about system change a lot. Everyone talks about system change, not climate change, and we all agree on that. But how do you start? How do you start when you say bring down capitalism? How do you, what concrete steps you can take? And when we want to change the system, you can't just change the system all at once, throwing all the old stuff out the window the first day. Just like when you're trying to get your clothes off, you cannot take them off all at once. You have to start with your jacket, your shoes, your pants. You have to take them out one by one. So we need to change the system by taking down the structures that led to this unjust system one by one. And the structure that has led to financial colonialism, to debt, through the extraction of natural resources and the climate crisis, if we can build enough power and build a global grassroots movement that has enough power to overthrow that, we will be well on our way to changing the rest of the system, and we'll actually have a vehicle to do that. We will have the instrument to do that, which we don't have today. We have a lot of great papers, a lot of great articles, a lot of great voices that define the problem, but we don't have the power to make the differences that we need. And for that, we need to get into motion, we need to get into action, and we need to start building power. And as we build power, appetite comes as you eat. We will have more power to take on bigger challenges and capitalism and the larger system as we bring enough groups together. That's the vision that we have. We are well into that process of going there, but we understand that we will only be able to tackle the challenges that we are big enough and have power enough to tackle at any given time. Thank you so much. I hope to see you in person soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, and thank you, Scientist Rebellion and AmbientalIST for the invitation. And thank you so much, Esteban and Luis, because it was a pleasure to listen to you talking. Beautiful. I'm very happy to see this movement arriving in Portugal. I know a bit about you through XR Serbia, which is already inside the campaign and working with this campaign. And thank you, Esteban, especially for bringing Sankara into this talk, because and these notions of green colonialism and everything, because it makes it so much more profound and yeah. So let's begin. So my name is Shay. I'm an intersectional activist. I'm working with Extinction Rebellion in Minas Now. Minas Now is an anti-extractivist. An anti-mineration collective working here in Portugal. We are also working with INAT. INAT is a new organization that is building an anti-extractivist and for life alliance with other countries like Serbia, Argentina, Spain, but also countries that from the global north, like Germany, that are all together in our own territories trying to fight against this monster called extractivism. And so I'm going to talk a bit more about the Portuguese reality, either as obviously as a country that has a huge colonial history and that to pay, but also as a periphery from Europe and a country that is being at this time having this great threat over our country, namely by the mineration companies. At this time, a fourth of our country, and we are talking about the mountains and the places that are still that have biodiversity working. A fourth of the country has been issued either for prospection or exploration of around 30 minerals. This is called the Plan de Fomento Mineiro, it's the national program for mineration in Portugal. And there has never been a territorial threat like this in this country. So I'm going to talk about these two issues, and also the areas of the country and the other countries that have been working a bit more. So I would start maybe by saying why do we, and when I say we, even though I'm talking as an activist now, not in the name of my collectives, but it's what we believe. Why do we use the word neocolonialism when we talk about, for example, the mineration troubles in Portugal? When we start to follow the money, and that is the big issue here, and that's why that format is so important, I think. It's because it's the movement that is putting the finger where it hurts in the system. It's the financial system that is behind all of these operations of capitalism. When we start to follow the money and we start to see why do we have these huge necessities, energetic necessities, either for fossil fuels, what we consider fossil fuels, or so-called alternatives. When we look at the level of necessities, for example, even in the European context, why do we have such, why is it so necessary to keep on extracting the level that we are doing today? Well, when we look at the reality, there is this axis of power in Europe, which I think is the French and German axis of power, that has this huge car fleet that needs to be exchanged in the next few years. And we have to remember that when we talk about green colonialism, when we talk about green investments by governments and etc., we really have to look at who is benefiting from this transition model. And when we see that these powers in Europe, for example, they have this huge car fleet that they do have to exchange, and they have to do it very, very fast. And this is being used also as a way to force, for example, that natural gas, or for example, that nuclear power, or for example, lithium, that all of these resources are being called national interest, or they want to call it national interest or European interest, so they can mine and extract all of these resources. We can see that there is an interest by certain countries that will push this agenda towards the peripheries. And when we talk about peripheries, and there is this international discussion, the global south, it's not only a geographical institution, let's put it like this. When we look at territories, we have to look, it has to be intersectional look, so we have to look at gender, race, and class when you look at these territories. And what we see is that the extractivist companies and the agenda, actually, they look and they prey on these territories, actually, because it is these territories first that have the natural resources, that have biodiversity, it's where the resources are, but also these populations are also not ready, it's not even ready, but
these populations can be preyed upon, and governments and companies, they use the isolation and specific characteristics of these peoples to get the social license to operate, like Esteban was talking about. So it's the progress agenda. We will bring jobs, we will bring the progress, we will bring, schools, hospitals, whatever the state or the companies can give to these populations. This is one axis of why we call it neocolonialism, because there is this agenda not only of certain countries, but actually it's the financial system on certain territories, and it can be either with the mining companies or by the financing of these projects. That's what the banking system is actually doing. But also, when you look, for example, to who are these mining companies, for example, when we talk about the Rio Tinto or Savannah Resources, these transnational, actually, mining companies, who are they? When we look at the top shareholders of these companies, we can see that, for example, in Rio Tinto case, and many companies that are seated, for example, in Australia, in Canada, or that are quoted in the London markets, it's the top shareholders are actually like the royal family of the UK. So actually, it's textbook colonialism. We can actually say that it's textbook colonialism. And then I want to enter into another part. I have here more things, but I think there will be time also with the questions. But then we have also inside of our own countries, and Portugal being a very specific case of being, of course, so responsible for how the world actually works nowadays, and also so responsible for what has happened to Africa and to, for example, South America and other territories, and having this debt, this historical debt to pay to these countries, and being also preyed upon by the IMF and as a periphery of Europe, being in this very, how do you say this, gray area, Portugal. I heard from so-called environmentalists, I would put them maybe a bit on the liberal left, that the way that Portugal has to do these payments to the global south is by licensing the exploration of materials like lithium, for example, in Portugal, so we don't do it in other areas. And this is something that we want to argue against, because either it comes from a place of ignorance, because, for example, you cannot have a lithium battery that doesn't have other 30 minerals. And where does these other 30 minerals come from? For example, you don't have a battery of lithium without cobalt, and cobalt comes from Africa. And we know that in many cases it is children mining these materials. So, and we cannot argue that doing damage elsewhere is the way to pay for the debt. So we are very much invested in this idea that the first step, like Esteban said, is the cancellation of the debt and the acknowledgement that the debt system is a corrupt system to keep the global south poor, to maintain the privileges on the country and on the class, actually, the class that has the capital. So to maintain the privileges and the fluxes of the distribution and the production of wealth, and to keep the world as it is. And so this is why we argue against so much this idea of the swaps, of the sacrificial areas, that we will sacrifice this area, a specific area in the north for this area in the south, or also the kind of swap that turns out to be almost like a license to destroy or to pollute, like Stephen and Luis talked previously. And when we are facing the biggest existential crisis and ecological crisis like we are nowadays, to put forth false solutions and to keep on on having systems like the debt, for example, to control and to maintain the power in the same structure that we have, and to argue that only exchanging the resource of energy that we are using is enough to have a just transition, it's something that we cannot accept. So we are very happy to see Pact for Climate coming to Portugal, because it is such an important way to start talking about decolonization, and we have so much work to do actually inside of our movements and our organizations to look at what Portugal and its role in the past has been. Portugal can do these historical reparations inside Portugal actually and outside. Outside by cancelling debt immediately, by taking itself out and its companies out of the global south, by repairing also financially without swaps, okay? This is actually, but not only Portugal, inside of its own country, has populations that are that have this heritage of what we have, of the horrors that we have been into as a colonial power. We do have to do reparation inside of our own country, because the state itself is the state and the Portuguese society is still benefiting from those errors from the past, and that has to be acknowledged and repaired. And these communities inside the peripheries of Portugal are still being made refuge by these old errors. So we have this great opportunity, I think, to look at our countries, look at our territories from where we are, and being someone that worked with, for example, the Caravana Zapatista, the Zapatista Caravan for Life, and having this opportunity to ask indigenous communities, not only in Zapatista, but I'm now going to focus Zapatista, how to do these historical reparations in their own stand view. They would say we defend life and the territory from where we are standing. And that is the best way we can actually do this, I think, as white privileged Portuguese people, is actually using our bodies as a way to stop this monster called extractivism, called capitalism, because it is a monster with many heads and many names, the system that we are fighting against. But this is one of the ways that we can do it. Another way, of course, is to acknowledge what we did in the past and do the reparations. But the reparations cannot be more damage. We cannot have more damage. We have, at this point, and these are numbers from the Oxfam in 2016, around 25% of what is left of biodiversity in the planet is like 25%. And of this 25%, it is the resistant peoples of the world, many of them the original peoples of the world that are defending this last bit of biodiversity. And these are the resilient parts of our planet that are maintaining still, and not for long, what we call the systems of life. And so we cannot say that a political or historical reparation, I'm going to give now an image because I'm a poet also, sorry, but we cannot give the poison that we have been giving to the sons and daughters of others to our sons and daughters and say that that is a reparation. That is not a reparation. A reparation is to acknowledge in what system we are living, and we cannot face what is coming and to propose change without proposing an economical, and not only, but there has to be said, a financial and economical complete different system. We cannot maintain we cannot maintain this system and do a just transition. It is impossible. There is no green capitalism. There is something that it's impossible to have. Sorry, I'm getting a bit lost because it's something that we should also do. But maybe we can come back to more of these things next. But that is what we want to say, basically, that we are so invested in a just transition, but it has to be a green transition that is not focused, that the green part is not green on like green investments, greenwashing, green colonialism. It has to be another kind of green, so we cannot maintain this model without talking about degrowth and without talking about a fundamental change on the way we consume and produce and the financial system. So that's what I want to say for now.
Okay, thanks. Can you... like that, but maybe we will ask just now if the public has questions, so we can talk to Stella about these issues. Maybe someone has questions about the mining in Portugal, in Montalegre, or about how it's being done by a corrupt company, like Luzon. I don't know if someone has questions about that. No? Okay, so maybe if you want to...
Yes, I would like to talk a bit more. If you give me, like, it's a bit difficult to synthesize, but I would like to talk at least a bit of the proposed mind, because there has been an update that is quite important. Yes. Okay. Of course.
Perfect.
Yes.
So now that we talked about how there are still many neocolonialist forces working, and we talked about debt cancellation, but for me this issue was a bit unclear, like how does it work, and is it possible, like Esteban explained, but to get a better notion, we invited Eugenia Beach to talk a bit about this green financing and how that works. So if you would like to start your presentation, please.
Hi everybody. I'm sorry, I'm not going to talk about green finance. I'm going to talk about the Troika intervention in Portugal. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. But well, I'm an economist and I work to collaborate with a collaborative laboratory on work, labor and social protection. So I'm not dealing in the last 5 years with debt-related issues, but I was a member of IAC. IAC was the Citizens Debt Audit, and we did a lot of work during the Troika's intervention years. And maybe there are, going back to what Esteban has said, is really useful, is really important and key for to have a grassroots movement for people to join and to analyze and to scrutinize, I'm not sure if it's the right word, all these issues, all the attempts to greenwash the problem of debt and all these new innovations that the financial system is providing, because there are a lot of camouflage behind. And maybe I would just to have something related with climate swaps. I'm not familiar with that, but the explanation and the answer that Esteban was given also made me think about odious debt. So basically, back in the 80s, there were a lot of bilateral credit that was given from the countries from the north to the south to help them to set up dams or big infrastructures. And there was a caveat. There was like in this, it was like not completely solidary flows of capital that was given to the countries in need, because they come with strings attached. Usually, they wanted that the country that is providing the debt, that also provided the service to solve the situation, wherever it was. And there is a famous case that Norway acknowledged the odiousness of the debt, and they cancelled the debt based on that. And this is I'm not sure, but I think it was like $50 million to buy some cargo ships for bananas. The Bananeiros is very famous, and you could find this if you check the internet. But basically, the country that was providing the boats to Ecuador was Norway, that was at the same time the creditor. And so there are all these complex relations, and it's very important to untangle. But I think the debt swaps, it seems that they also perpetuate new sorts of business, even if it is with NGOs and NGOs controlled by the North. So it's just something that I wanted to add. I wonder if I could share I have a PowerPoint, maybe if it is okay.
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
But I'm not sure if I'm able to. It's not working. Maybe you need to give me permission. Well, if not, no problem. I just.
So, our speakers who did not speak Portuguese have left. Is there anybody here who does not understand Portuguese? Okay, one person. Dava, could you do the whisper translation? Okay. Preferem que eu fale português?
Sim. Ainda mal que vai cansado.
É porque eu tenho tudo em inglês, mas não faz mal. Vamos ver como é que corre. Mas eu não estou conseguindo partilhar o ecrã e adicionar uma apresentação. Não conseguem ver aqui, né? Não há problema. Mas eu vou começar por dizer, portanto, antes de falar do que aconteceu durante a Troika, é preciso dizer que a crise da dívida soberana foi, pela primeira vez, ela revela a condição subordinada de Portugal, ou pelo menos havia, no momento da entrada no euro, havia muito poucas pessoas que eram críticos do euro. E vai ser com a crise da dívida soberana que, de facto, essas críticas, o papel da dívida enquanto elemento de subordinação de Portugal fica mais claro e mais evidente e aparece a hegemonia da Alemanha. É preciso dizer também que é importante compreender o papel da dívida, a dívida enquanto elemento que permite a acumulação de lucro e o crescimento económico, se for contido dentro da esfera da produção, mas fora da esfera da produção, de facto, existem efeitos bastante perversos, porque não só acentuam a especulação financeira, como conduzem a uma volatilidade acrescida dos ativos, como aumentam a incerteza. E, portanto, a dívida enquanto mecanismo de subordinação é um mecanismo que é conhecido há vários séculos. Agora, e até como elemento de subordinação dos Estados e dos Estados soberanos e dos soberanos na Idade Média. Mas o que nós também sabemos é que desde a década de 70, com a financiarização, começam a emergir estes aspectos menos reconhecidos da subordinação. E, portanto, porquê? Porque aumentam os fluxos financeiros internacionais. Eles deixam de ser coisas muito ligadas ao comércio e aumentam todas estas trocas financeiras e que de alguma maneira que estão expressas na divisão entre o sul e o norte global. Portanto, para além das formas tradicionais de subordinação que são muito características da relação entre o centro e a periferia, como por exemplo o Original Sin, que previne que os países pobres consigam angariar financiamento na sua moeda doméstica, não é? E, portanto, já foi falado, de alguma maneira, isto, ao estarem dependentes do financiamento em moeda estrangeira, é um novo layer de volatilidade, não controlam isso, e, portanto, isto é uma forma de subordinação. Juntam-se outras formas, como sejam os fluxos de capital. Estes fluxos de capital podem ir desde o investimento direto estrangeiro, que tem um caráter de permanência, até fluxos de curto prazo, que são mais voláteis e acrescem, são mais propensos à crise. Mas a financiarização também representa uma segunda vaga de imperialismo. Porquê? Porque, para além da questão do benefício que os Estados Unidos têm enquanto detentores da world money, o dólar representa isso, nós vimos com a crise do euro que a Alemanha, ainda que de forma involuntária, também beneficia de uma certa hegemonia que lhe dá poderes. E, de facto, foi isso que se viu durante a crise da dívida soberana. Portanto, a assimetria das relações de poder ficou entre o core, e aqui estou a pensar um bocadinho no diretório franco-alemão, e nos países do Sul, esta assimetria de poder ficou mais evidente. Porquê? Porque os países do Sul estavam altamente endividados, e é mesmo pena que eu não vos consiga mostrar. Eu tinha dois gráficos com a composição da dívida por tipo de instrumento e por tipo de credor. E, no fundo, é isso que eu vou tentar transmitir com mais detalhe para ver se percebe bem o que é que está aqui em questão. Mas, portanto, o euro, não é? O prémio que existia, que tornava a dívida portuguesa mais cara, vai suprimir. Há um excesso de liquidez, a própria gestão pelo Banco Central, há um excesso de liquidez e ela é reciclada nos países do Sul através da aquisição de dívida pública. Claro que isto tudo corre bem até 2008, quando acontece, portanto, temos uma situação de crise. E o que está aqui em causa é que a propriedade deste capital, uma percentagem muito significativa da dívida pública era detida por entidades não residentes. Portanto, cria-se aqui um conflito em que os Estados soberanos, em vez de preservarem a defesa do interesse nacional, o interesse dos seus cidadãos, em vez de evitarem o empobrecimento generalizado, portanto, há uma prioridade que é dada ao cumprimento do serviço da dívida, ao pagamento das amortizações da dívida, ao pagamento dos juros, para que estes investidores privados não entrem em falência. E, portanto, quem é que eram estes investidores privados? Uma parte significativa eram os bancos alemães e franceses. Temos também uma série de outros investidores institucionais, como sejam seguradoras, fundos de investimento, fundos monetários. Portanto, de novo, um sistema financeiro a crescer com o euro e depois a uma complexificação, um aumentar dos fluxos financeiros entre os países, o que Lenin chamava como capital export, portanto a exportação de capital, que quando as coisas correm mal, o desequilíbrio de poder torna-se mais evidente, e foi isso que aconteceu em Portugal. Em vez de se reconhecer a insustentabilidade da dívida e a necessidade de cancelar dívida, de reestruturar a dívida, portanto o que aconteceu foi que se acordou com o FMI e com a União Europeia, com o BCE e com a Comissão, portanto, uma solução que preservava, que defendia os interesses destes credores privados. Portanto, como é que isto foi feito? E foi injetando liquidez com condicionalidade. E a condicionalidade era, de facto, preservar o pagamento da dívida, contribuir para a sua redução, e depois nós todos sabemos qual foi o legado disso em termos de perda do PIB, desemprego, migração, empobrecimento generalizado, desigualdade e até maior endividamento. Na verdade, uma das coisas que se pode dizer é que a dívida pública de 2007 para 2015 aumentou 60 pontos percentuais, ela passou de 68% para 129% em 2015. A dívida privada aumentou 30 pontos percentuais, de 195% para 223% do PIB. A dívida externa, de 2007 para 2015, portanto, depois da intervenção da Troika, apenas se reduziu em 1,2 pontos percentuais. Portanto, isto mostra que estas intervenções, os programas macroeconómicos de estabilização, não resolvem os problemas do país, não tornam o país autónomo, mais produzido e mais produtivo, muito pelo contrário, agravam os problemas. E, de facto, é mesmo muito, é pena não vos conseguir mostrar, mas posso-vos dizer que, comparando 2010 com 2013, olhando para a composição da dívida, o que nós temos é, por um lado, um aumento do endividamento, passa de 150 mil milhões para 210 mil milhões. A sua composição também se altera. E desculpa, é preciso perder aqui um bocadinho de tempo com isto para se perceber os mecanismos de subordinação e como é que estas entidades externas que supostamente nos vêm ajudar, no fundo vêm complicar a dívida. Em 2010 nós tínhamos uma dívida que era essencialmente em obrigações do Tesouro, que era denominada em euros, portanto 75% da dívida era em obrigações do Tesouro. Em 2013, o peso das obrigações do Tesouro reduz para 45%. Em alternativa, nós vamos ter uns empréstimos multilaterais com os credores oficiais. Como disse, Comissão Europeia, Banco Central Europeu e FMI. O que é que isto significa? Significa que as OTs é uma dívida que tem uma jurisdição portuguesa, significa que é fácil passar uma lei na Assembleia da República a dizer que se faz a reestruturação daquela dívida. É fácil, portanto, enquanto a jurisdição for nacional, nós podemos escolher a quem vamos imputar as perdas. E podemos, por exemplo, dizer que o retalho, existe uma coisa que se chama certificados de aforro, que é um instrumento de dívida dirigido essencialmente ao retalho. É possível excluir, é um instrumento não transacionável, é possível excluir este instrumento da reestruturação. Portanto, e é possível também imputar estas perdas aos grandes detentores das obrigações do Tesouro. Portanto, olhando para... E o mesmo não acontece quando nós passamos a ter estas facilidades, estes empréstimos com os credores oficiais, porque eles são muito mais poderosos do que nós. A título de exemplo, eu devo dizer que o FMI não assina um contrato com um país. Não é como um contrato que nós fazemos quando vamos a um banco. O FMI não assina um contrato. Porquê? Porque tem o entendimento que ele não é um credor igual aos outros. Ele está acima e esta super senioridade que ele tem dá-lhe privilégios. Ele terá que ser sempre pago. E, portanto, num país, ou um país que desafiar o FMI, como o caso da Argentina, vai ter bastantes retaliações e bastantes problemas. Dizer que, em termos da composição por tipo de credor, nós tínhamos em 2010 64% da dívida pertencia a investidores não residentes privados, os tais 100 mil milhões que detinham as OTs. Em dezembro de 2003, o valor da dívida detida por este tipo de investidores reduziu-se em 50 mil milhões. Em alternativa, aparecemos aqui com um Banco Central Europeu que começa a fazer compras de dívida em mercado secundário, que permite que esta transferência, no fundo, quando na iminência de um país não pagar, temos o Banco Central a entrar, a libertar estes investidores estrangeiros, estes investidores não residentes, que tinham dívida dos países do Sul, e o Banco Central Europeu atua, direciona a sua ação para libertar estes investidores desta dívida. E é por isso que entre 2010 e, no fundo, não é sequer em 2013, é logo no fim de 2011, esta quebra de 50 milhões é imediata. Depois, dizer... Sim? Vou só fechar, assim, eu sei que é um bocadinho chato e é um bocadinho é difícil não havendo uma imagem, mas só para dizer que, no fundo, a intervenção da Troika invalidou a possibilidade de uma reestruturação da dívida entre 2010 e 2013 ou 2015. Portanto, Portugal fica mais vulnerável para servir a dívida, mas também para reestruturar. E eu acho que isto é uma coisa que deve estar bastante presente neste movimento do Debt for Climate, que é não aceitar, e eles sublinharam bastante bem isso, não aceitar a possibilidade de dar dívida em troca, de aumentar o endividamento. É preciso mesmo ir reestruturar, não pagando, cancelando a dívida. E à parte disto, nós sabemos que os credores oficiais posicionam-se, eles protegem o interesse do setor financeiro privado, não protegem o interesse dos Estados soberanos. Para além disso, o FMI põe condições financeiras, uma penalização de 3% em países que estão débeis no seu pagamento, com dificuldades para fazer o pagamento da dívida, para cumprir o serviço da dívida, e ignoram a necessidade de partilhar responsabilidades. Por parte, como há pouco falava, a questão da dívida odiosa, há aqui é preciso uma partilha de responsabilidades entre o país devedor e o país credor. E depois uma falta de legitimidade democrática a vários níveis que neste momento não vos vou falar. Muito obrigada.
aprofundar mais nesse seguinte perguntas. Nós temos uma pergunta
Sim, funciona para as duas. Portanto, estivemos aqui a falar durante este painel sobre os impactos ou a força que o Norte Global tem sobre o global e depois também os impactos de países mais poderosos dentro da Europa que têm sobre Portugal. Claro que não temos agora estar aqui a fazer perguntas relativamente ao Norte versus Sul, porque as pessoas que podemos poder terem essa experiência não estão aqui já, mas relativamente à força ou ao poder que existe entre países na Europa, especificamente entre Portugal e países como França e Alemanha, gostaria de perguntar o que é que países como Portugal podem fazer para que sejamos ouvidos pelo norte da Europa no que toca a estes tópicos. E tanto para a Sheila como para a Eugénia,
Eu posso dar a resposta mais rápida possível e gostava mesmo de conseguir falar um bocadinho de mais das minhas. Então, da nossa parte, não é Portugal contra Alemanha e França. Isto é um problema sistémico e tem que ter respostas internacionais, ou seja, temos que ter respostas coordenadas internacionalmente, mas a política tem que ser baseada na ação local. Isto é assim que nós vemos e como internacionalistas não podemos também entrar nesse tipo de matemática. Agora sim, sabemos que há desníveis, queremos combatê-los, mas não tenho tempo para explicar como é que isto seria feito para além de como disse agora. Ou seja, que é mesmo complexo e que temos que continuar a fazer pressão, mas no ponto em que estamos da crise ecológica é proteger o território a partir de onde estamos e pôr em causa todo o sistema internacional financeiro e económico. Não existe outra forma. Não dá para direcionar apenas para a Alemanha, para a França, etc.
Obrigada.
Sim, eu concordo, eu acho, concordo, volto à questão da mobilização dos movimentos de baixo para cima. Acho que é muito importante um escrutínio completo do que as empresas andam a fazer, das relações. Desculpem, uma multinacional consegue chegar com muita facilidade a um governo. Não é o que acontece com as pessoas, com os habitantes de uma aldeia que vai ter os custos sociais das decisões das multinacionais internacionais que não estão cá e que falam diretamente. Os governos não vivem nesses sítios. Portanto, é muito importante, é fundamental, contestação local e uma outra coisa, e desmontar tudo aquilo, as teorias do bem-estar que vão resolver os problemas, e isso eu concordo com uma coisa que achei dito no início, que é follow the money. Vamos ver, porque é aí que está o verdadeiro interesse, é com isso que se descobre qual é a verdadeira motivação. E, portanto, acho que é de facto responsabilizar os políticos, os locais, os nacionais, não responsabilizar, escrutinar e nunca esquecer. Eu vejo sempre isto, eu encaro isto sempre como a luta de classes. Nós não nos podemos nunca esquecer e estamos em pé de igualdade. É esta luta de classes que nos dá a ligação, não é? Com quem está nos outros países a sofrer o mesmo. E solidariedade internacional, acima de tudo, para mobilizar, como dizia a Sheila, a ação local.
Obrigada. Por isso, essa altura, na próxima só 3, não sei se quer dizer que temos uma rápida da situação em Portugal.
Certo. Como vos disse, um quarto do território nacional está neste momento sob a maior ameaça capitalista que já houve por estas bandas, por esta geografia. Eu não defendo Portugal, eu defendo a terra e esta é a geografia onde estou. Atenção, é bastante importante traz narrativas dizer isto, porque as lutas anti-mineração podem ser cooptadas pela extrema-direita se não houver uma resposta à altura da esquerda para estar nestes sítios com as populações. Pronto, deixar este réptil de precisamos de mãos e precisamos de mãos e cabeças e corações que sabem o que estão a fazer e que estão a lutar pela vida neste momento. Mas sim, a situação em Portugal, neste momento temos a possível aprovação do primeiro grande projeto que a empresa Savannah Resources fala de ser a maior mina a céu aberto de lítio da Europa. Estamos a falar da mina do Barroso. São várias as geografias dentro de Portugal que estão sob ameaça: Barroso, Argemela, também em Sul. Eu vou falar mais do Barroso porque é o que eu conheço melhor, esta realidade. O Barroso é património mundial da agricultura tradicional, tem mais de 60% da biodiversidade do país, é limítrofe ao único parque nacional que temos em Portugal, e neste momento o território tão pequeno como o Barroso tem cerca de 22 projetos para prospecção ou para exploração. Isto é uma loucura, é a única forma que eu consigo pôr isto. E neste momento esta possível aprovação pode ser já para março, sendo que já houve outras alturas em que poderia ter havido uma aprovação por parte da APA, não aconteceu. E foi adiado. Foi adiado no sentido de a empresa poder reestruturar o seu plano o estudo de impacto ambiental e apresentar novamente. Há muito pouco tempo, a Luz ao Recursos, que é uma empresa portuguesa que não tem qualquer experiência em mineração e que está a tentar fazer o projeto da mina do Romano, ficou exatamente na mesma situação. E vamos acabar em 30 segundos, não é? Mas basicamente a empresa deu, vou tentar mesmo, tipo, não sei se vou conseguir acabar, mas a empresa utilizou-se da visão, e estas empresas utilizam-se muitas vezes da própria imprensa, para dar uma notícia que agora veio a ser dada como falsa, tanto pela APA como por outras, pelo próprio ministro Duarte Coelho, do Ambiente, mas basicamente em que dizia que a mina tinha sido aprovada, mas não. A mina não foi aprovada, a refinaria que havia lá para acontecer foi chumbada por causa do lobo, e acho que vamos acabar, não sei se vale a pena acabar.
Bom, pessoal, nós também vamos terminar aqui, ok? Já sabem, isto é tudo trabalho voluntário. Se puderem contribuir com alguma coisa para nós darmos uns trocos aqui à malta que esteve a trabalhar ao longo destes 2 dias, ok? E pá, olha, é assim, vamos transmitir evidentemente o plenário final. Muito obrigado por nos seguirem. PT Rebutos na Informação Sem Tretas. Até já.